You are tuned into the History Brats podcast, sponsored by Churchill Publishing. Join Holly and Kathi as they wind their way through all things historical, relevant, and Henry Cavill. Go ahead, grab a glass of Prosecco, chill out, and enjoy.
Hey guys, it's Holly and Kathi back with the History Brats, and today we are going to be talking to you about Catherine of Aragon, as promised. Yeah, there's a lot to say on her. I think we're kind of rolling with our strong woman kind of agenda that we're going with at the moment, talking to you about the strong women in history. And what better place to continue with Henry than with Henry VIII's first wife. So I want to get started with a very basic opinion of Catherine of Aragon. Personally, it's hard because I really appreciate her, and I really
Sorry, I'm being silly.
Oh, okay. I think what's going on? Oh yeah, we've got Henry with us today as well.
Yes, we've got Henry.
Things up. You know, character Charles Brandon definitely had a opinion on Catherine. Literally, as we were setting up the film today, Kathi said, "Oh, you're going to love this." She prints a picture, and she goes and pins him up so I can see him now. So I'm quite happy. Of your,
We're
he'll be joining us today. But yeah, my basic opinion is I do have a lot of I'm kind of, to a certain extent, I'm in awe of her because she was such a magnificent woman. The thing I get bogged down with is I have such an opinion of her through Anne Boleyn's eyes, and I do tend then to judge her from that situation. But actually researching her and looking a lot into her, there's a lot of characteristics she had that I really, she was just, in every way, she was just absolutely magnificent. So I guess I'm straight down the middle on this one. What do you think about?
You know,
what's your kind of opinion on Catherine?
I've totally gone back and forth on Catherine. I can't imagine how awful it was for her from the time that she arrived in England and Arthur died, and then she was so badly mistreated by Henry VII, not Henry VIII. Well, eventually, yes.
Yeah.
That I think it took a lot of nuts to do what she did and to stand strong. My biggest problem with her, I think, is that I think that she allowed her religion and her morality to put distance between her and Mary. I don't think Mary was parented very well by either of them. I don't think that either of them served her very well. And I kind of blame Catherine for that, because there was actually a point where, had she, given in to Henry, which I'm not saying she should have, okay? But the fact that she did not do as he asked didn't result in as much upheaval for her as it did for Mary. So I guess as a parent, I'm thinking, what would I have done? It was clear that Anne Boleyn was going to take her place. There was just no question of that. So for her to stubbornly hold on to this when she could have released it, and she still would have had her place in history. Yeah. I think it's fair to say, in my opinion, and I've heard all the story about Jane Seymour and everything else, but I have to say that in my opinion, his best loved wife was Catherine, because they were together for all those years and they were happy until it became clear that she could not have sons.
Yeah.
So I think that Catherine of Aragon, I can't imagine being the age she was, dumped into a strange place with all these weird people. Yeah. Having been brought up by her mother as a warrior queen.
Yeah.
Pretty much. So this whole, so she was, I don't know whether she was dropping back in time, coming into a more civil world or a less civil world. I don't know, but I think it had to be, she had to be incredibly frustrated and frightened, I would think.
Yeah.
She held on to her integrity. That I totally appreciate. I just think she was a selfish mom. And I guess that's where I go.
I have exactly the same opinion, and I think with Catherine, I kind of, while we talk about it, I would quite like rather to work forward to kind of work back, because it's quite an interesting contrast from the woman we judge her from. I particularly judge her the last kind of 5 years of her life, to the woman she began as. And I think it's quite an interesting contrast to see how totally different the two are. So at the end of her life, I absolutely have the same opinion as you do, that she was so, and don't get me wrong, if she was without children, if she was without any other responsibility, I would absolutely back her and her decision to stand firm that she was Queen of England. She called herself Queen of England up until the minute she died. Her household
we still call her that.
Still called her. She's still called Queen of England now, and there's a huge part of me that wants to say fair enough. Absolutely, for the fact that hundreds of years later, people are still arguing your case and still willing to put their foot down and say that you were queen, you were indeed the true queen, is amazing. On the other hand, I agree with you. It
is amazing. And then
yeah.
I'm going to throw something in here, but all 6 of Henry's wives, there is still an argument to this day on each and every one of them about something. Okay. And Catherine, I think Catherine, to me, says queen more than any of the other ones. Okay. I'm not taking anything away from them, but she had the longevity. What was it, 27 years or something like that they were married? I don't know, 24, 27, something like that.
Long time.
And she was schooled for it, Holly. She was brought up to be a queen as opposed to the other 5, okay? Although I think the argument can be made that Anne Boleyn was certainly, schooled in it, but not from birth.
Same extent.
So I have a lot of respect for the way Catherine of Aragon comported herself and grew. But I think that in the end, it became all about her.
Absolutely.
And that's not a plus. I would have respected her more had she said, fuck it, that if this is what you're going to do, this is what you're going to do, but you're not going to hurt my child. Because at that point, if you'll recall, Mary had been sent to Wales, was being treated as Prince of Wales for all intents and purposes. So when Catherine said no, man, that was terrible for Mary. I mean, that he loved Mary. I think most people will agree that Henry loved Mary until this. So, I think there's a lot of courage here. I think there's undoubted devotion to a man who, I can't even say that. I gotta say that Henry VIII during this period of time, during this marriage, to me is not a bad man. Because
not during, and it's interesting, reading about their marriage, because the interesting thing is, no matter what you say about, yes, okay, Henry certainly had his head turned. However, Catherine was the first, he left her as regent. That was unheard of.
Right.
While he was away, she fought back against the Scots. And James IV was murdered under her command, under her, while she was in charge, to the point she even sent him part of his bloodied coat. And I mean, they had a double, for a start, they had a double coronation. you never heard of this. What greater honour can you give your wife than to allow her to be coronated at the same time as you? It was just, he showed her so much, so in love with her. And I mean, Catherine had 6 pregnancies, as we know. The first 4, I mean, I went through every single one of them. The first one, was stillborn. The second one lived for 52 days. So each separate circumstance was so heartbreaking. But she lost all these babies. Then she has Mary. Then she loses another baby. Henry always stayed kind and considerate to her. And then we've got, when Henry marries Anne, from the moment she has a miscarriage or the baby stillborn, he goes absolutely nuts. So it does really show to me how much care he had for Catherine above the others.
One of the coolest. Oh, go ahead.
On the flip side of that, how much you truly care about someone if you're willing to leave them at all. It is we can say, yes, he had much more care for her than he did any of his other wives. Yes, it was more of a natural love, I believe. Especially considering the fact that he pushed to marry her and it was one of the first things he did as king. We can see that. But how much loyalty do you have if after that many years of marriage your head's turned so easily?
I think, two things. One is that we know that Ferdinand was not pleased with the idea that she would marry Henry, okay? But Henry managed to convince Ferdinand, he said that it wouldn't matter whether I was going to be king or not. I'd marry her. So there's that. But, I think the thing with it, you can't be with, how to put this nicely, okay? They were together a long, long time.
Yeah.
And we know that he had mistresses on the side, several of them. But I think Catherine was older than he was. She lost her figure through no fault of her own, I assume, through all these babies. My point being that here's this young man who's been in this relationship for 20 plus years, and she's now very matronly. And I can see why he swerved out of the fast lane there. It was like, if he had not, I would have been surprised. But I didn't. I truly did not expect the Anne Boleyn thing, okay? Because that was just massive. I mean, but Henry never did anything halfway. And the other thing is, we don't have a clue what he said to Catherine.
No.
Was he? Well, it was 7 years, Holly. That's another thing, man. Anne Boleyn from start to queenship was 7 years. Catherine's living through this.
Yeah.
It must have occurred to her at some point that this would die, that it would die out.
Was there a part of her that thought, he's having a blip? He's just having a blip, he's throwing a paddy, and it's all going to go back to normal. When you actually, and I mean, obviously I've written through Anne Boleyn's eyes, I've got her perspective. When I'm doing that, I must admit, I don't necessarily stop and think how excruciatingly painful the whole situation was for Catherine. And I mean, this is a woman who, and we're always talking about these women who suffered through great losses, who had terrible things happen to them throughout time. We talk about the Lady Jane Greys, we talk about the Mary Queen of Scots, we talk about Anne Boleyn. We do not actually talk about Catherine of Aragon with that same kind of thought process. And when you think about it, this is a woman she was betrothed to Arthur for years before they actually married. She moves to a foreign country, a country that since she was 3 years old has believed she's going to be queen of one day.
And they weren't friends with.
Yeah, and I mean, she gets here and she's married for 5 months, I believe, 5 months, and then Arthur dies. While she's here, she's also they move to Ludlow, which again is another strange place. And then she loses her husband there, and then she's kept as a pawn. Her dad doesn't help her out. He could make her suffering a lot easier if he just paid her the rest of the dowry. Henry VII doesn't help her out. There's no one kind of fighting her cause. She's had to fight for herself again and again and again. There's no one who's actually stepped in to help her. And then when her mother dies, she becomes even less attractive to England.
And then
Because,
Elizabeth of York dies after
no,
Arthur.
I mean, when Elizabeth of York died, we have Henry Henry VII considering marriage with Catherine because he doesn't want to lose the dowry money and he wants the rest of the dowry money. He realizes, Ferdinand's not going to pay up the rest anyway. And then her mother Isabella dies, and when she dies, Catherine doesn't inherit Castile.
I know.
Which makes her even less attractive. So we've got this girl who's not got a lot going for her really anymore.
Did Joanna?
She inherited.
She inherited it. Oh,
yeah.
Crazy Joanna.
And Castile, of course, was the bigger. It was the bigger player. It was the better half of her parents' marriage. So the fact that she didn't inherit that, she wasn't nearly as attractive to England as she was previously. She just had, and then when she did finally, I mean, can you imagine how she must have felt? She's married Arthur. Arthur's died. She's now faced with the idea of marrying Henry VII, who's much older than her. Yeah, much older. Just lost his wife. Only wants to marry her.
Revolting thought to me. I mean, it just on all levels.
Yeah. She would have become Queen of England and she would have fulfilled that destiny, and it probably would have been an easier route in terms of fulfilling that destiny. But when you've got Henry there, who's younger than her, he's young, he's attractive, he's the future king, he's this package. Who are you gonna? I honestly believe she set her eyes on Henry, the son, because there's a lot of Henry.
I never thought about this till you just said that. Had she married Henry VII,
she would have been queen.
And he could have died, and she would have been queen, and then Henry could have married Anne or whoever, and it would have been totally different. Totally different.
She wouldn't have been Queen of England for very long.
She didn't
Catherine, she was, I think she had this vision of herself being this Queen of England. She was everything a queen was meant to be. She was trained to be a queen. That was her life goal. Henry VII didn't necessarily offer that, and it's proven by the fact he doesn't die very long after. So they would have only had a few years of marriage.
I'd have been down with that.
Yeah.
Because I would have, because as queen, as Henry's queen, she's taken care of for the rest of her life. And she's a queen always.
Yeah.
Okay? She's a widow, queen regnant. Okay? Or no, my bad. Widow, queen consort. So I've been okay with that, but I can see where she had been schooled all her life, to have this impressive position, and given the choice between Henry VII and Henry VIII, in retrospect, it's a bad choice.
Hindsight, absolutely. I mean, when it comes down to it, she didn't actually get much choice in the end. Just going to move a minute because it's hammering down and it's not coming across now. Oh, got that.
3.
Yeah, so I just think.
Go ahead.
She had an awful time of it, And I think she was given there was all these whispers of what was going to happen to her.
How do you, go ahead.
No, I mean, a lot of them didn't come to fruition because it's like 7 years after Arthur's death, she finally marries Henry. So that's 7 long years of not knowing what your position is and what your life's going to end up being.
And Henry VII reduced her to poverty. You know,
exactly.
You know, I'm not even sure of all the dynamics that went on there, but they were ugly, whatever they were.
She hardly had enough money to pay her household and to pay her ladies in waiting, and that to her was important. It was her job to look after these people that are part of her household. And you've got to remember, a lot of the household she had would have been people known a long time because they'd come over from Spain with her. So she was loyal to these people, and to her, she was failing as a mistress if she couldn't pay their way.
What do you think what do you think her relationship with Mary really was? Let's remember how devout she was, okay? There's no question that was number one in her life, okay? I don't think anybody can argue that. But do you think she was a loving, warm mother to Mary?
I'm going to be totally honest in the fact that no, not necessarily. I think she would have cherished Mary to a certain extent because she was her only surviving child. But thinking about this just now, I mean, nowadays, and I'm not saying she did have it, but nowadays women, you know, it's a lot more diagnosable now, but they suffer through postnatal depression. Now, to me, if you've already lost 4 children in such terrible ways, and then you have this 5th child, are you not always going to be scared that something's going to happen to them? And would that not cause possibly a distance?
Yeah.
If you're afraid of losing something, human nature, you tend to push it away. And there's a part of me that believes, I mean, postnatal depression might have been the wrong form. I'm just trying to put our terms, you know, in with.
You're right.
But, you know, would there have been a part of her that didn't want to get close to this baby because she was so scared that she was going to lose her? Or would because of it? We don't know.
I can't imagine.
But no,
I can't imagine that she was emotionally healthy.
No, not at all.
And one of the reasons I say that is her devotion to the church. Okay, now I'm not trying to cast aspersions on any of this. I don't mean that at all. But I found in my life that someone who is fanatical on either side of something usually is covering up some kind of hole inside of themselves that they need to be, you know, fanatical or militant about. And so and the other thing is, I think that we can agree, oh dear, I think we can agree that Isabella probably wasn't the warmest mother either. So
these women didn't hear it. You know, these days we kind of, parents learn from their parents, you know? My mum learned from my nan how to be a good mum. I would have learned from my mum to be a good mum. Back then they didn't have that. It was actually rare to come from kind of that loving family. You know, I'm not saying it didn't happen, of course it did, but in royalty, you were born to be you. I know that sounds awful, but you were born a fool. You really were, especially as princess. You were born as a chick to be you. So she would have been raised in that way. It's hard from that standpoint. I believe Catherine would have prized Mary, because in Catherine's eyes, Mary, much like Catherine always saw the throne of England for herself, I think she would have always seen the throne of England for Mary, especially because Mary was her eldest child. So I think from that point of view, she would have prized Mary very much, and she would have wanted Mary to come into her put into her own. However, how much of a deep connection can you have with a child if you've chosen your title? Forget everything else, just think of this, it's between your title and your child. And again, you've chosen your title and you've chosen to fight this. When
I think that this had to, how much did this have to have hurt Mary? I mean, we talked about Mary a number of times, but you know,
yeah.
the thing, I find that so sad because,
Mary,
you know, this child, and she was almost an adult. She was 16, 17 years old when this happened. I can't even imagine not, but again, you know, just like we've said, perhaps it's all in the way you view it. Back then, it wasn't viewed the way we view it now. We see them as perhaps needing a little bit of emancipation, or, you know, that they were, you know, ruled by this whole boy network. Still, I
mean, I can absolutely, I mean, well, I can't absolutely, times are different, but if I was in Catherine of Aragon's position and I was told by Henry, you know, you're not queen anymore. However, if you choose to stop calling yourself queen, if you choose to accept Anne, if you and Mary choose to accept Anne, and you two can see each other, sure, I'm sorry, you've already been kicked off of the throne. You've already lost it. I do understand why she had to fight for it, but why not at least live your last few years in somewhat peace with your child instead of dying without ever seeing her again? It's heartbreaking.
Well, the other part of that is with respect to Mary, with Catherine having dug in so much about this, Mary had no choice but to dig in as well. And, you know, her response to Henry, when Henry was, you know, trying to get her to acknowledge that he was the head of the church and all that kind of thing. If her mother had been a little bit conciliatory, maybe Mary would have inherited that kind of, you know, mindset that, you know, we have to play this game.
Yeah.
Let's just play this game. Okay.
Yeah.
In the end, we will win just by virtue. But I think that a lot that Catherine did in the last, you know, from the Anne Boleyn on, hurt Mary more than it hurt Catherine.
And I think it's, I mean, we're going to cover Mary at some point. We've covered Mary before. We're going to cover Mary again. And Mary's one of these she's been tarnished with this brush. There's these things. But if we go back to her younger years and we think how much she was rejected by both parents, how does that shape you?
Mm-hmm.
You know,
what responsibility is it? Okay.
Yeah.
So right there, you know, when you asked me about Catherine of Aragon, you know, what should you and I as modern people, you know, should we see her more as the warrior queen who stood up for, you know, a strong woman who, you know, or do we look at her as a woman who failed a child, or could have failed her child in the interest of being that warrior woman?
Yeah. It is very much like she's loved a lot for her strongness and her, but where's the line between being strong and being stubborn? You know, where's the line between fighting for what you really want and losing everything else in the process?
And that's exactly what she did.
Yeah.
She lost everything. You know, I believe that had she found a way, even if she used her religion to justify it, okay, because I think we can say for sure that Catherine of Aragon used her religion copiously to explain and live her life. I mean, it was such a part of her that it became an excuse in spots, I think.
Everything she did was justified by this higher power. And I mean, there's a lot of people in this time that use that. But just because it was almost that kind of thought process of I can do no wrong because God is on my side.
And you almost wish that God had whispered to her and said, you know, this is not a battle you're going to win this way. You're not going to win it this way. So let's rethink what we do. And the other thing is Henry so isolated her even before he sent her away. I mean, he just kept removing all her ladies and till she was almost by herself. And I think go ahead.
The end of her life mirrors the beginning in a way. She started off her life almost in England in squalor and in minimalistic circumstances. She ended her life in minimalistic circumstances. And there's kind of a moral here, that yes, you should absolutely fight for what you believe in, and you should absolutely do everything you can to make your dreams and wishes come true. But you need to nurture the other things around you as well. And Catherine didn't do a lot of nurturing.
She left very little for Mary.
She really did. One thing I do, because especially when we've spoken about at the beginning, we talked about, the terrible circumstances she was in. One thing I didn't know until one thing I didn't know until I did a bit of research earlier is that she was actually the first female ambassador in Europe. So before she remarried she was actually the ambassador for the Aragon.
Yeah.
So, which amazing, and from what I was reading, it seems that Henry made her ambassador. Henry wanted her to be ambassador because he thought she was easy to control, and she proved the exact opposite, which to me says it all about her.
He recognized that she had the background, the skills, and the diplomacy that he didn't have. I mean, and clearly he valued her intelligence.
Yeah.
Huge.
If nothing, I value her for that, and I value her for the fact of how big an advocate she was for female education, and the money she piped into these colleges and universities, and we talk about Catherine Parr in that way, in the sense that they were big on, and Catherine of Aragon, to me, if you need an advocate of feminism and you need to show off this she was a feminist through and through. I've said that, and as I'm saying that, I'm thinking, well, she did, by those standards, I've got to say, because obviously she did concede on Henry having mistresses and stuff like that, which isn't necessarily very feminist, but by those standards, she was massively, for women, and she was a strong woman. I think we've kind of danced around the elephant in the room a little bit, in that we can't do a podcast about Catherine without asking each other the question, did she sleep with Arthur? I'll just put it like that. Did she sleep with Arthur?
This is such a great way to close out the podcast, because this is the one that everybody wants to know.
Catherine of Aragon discussion.
I have to tell you that I think they did. I do think they did. But I think that Catherine realized, and I wonder if perhaps her living this lie didn't contribute to her fighting so hard to stay where she was. I mean, because we were just talking about how her Christianity and her fervor.
Yeah.
It's almost as if she was paying back something. I have to make my conscience clear or something. I do think she did.
I honestly, there's never been a doubt in my mind, which is bad. And I think the opinions weigh against what we believe. I believe they slept together. I don't believe that in those days you could, especially with how religious she was, that you could be married for 5 months and not consummate, because her religion would have dictated to the fact then that their marriage wasn't a full one, wasn't true in the eyes of God. That would have eaten away at her. Maybe they didn't.
Told somebody.
Yeah.
Okay, let's think about this reasonably. Okay, we're talking 4 or 5 months that they lived together as man and wife. It is almost, I don't care how old you are. You know, you don't sleep in the same bed with a member of the opposite sex for 4 or 5 months that you don't care about. Okay.
Yeah.
You just don't. Okay. So I'm so torn on how I feel about this. Like, I think, and the only time I will ever give the Spanish princess credit for anything is that last scene of the series, you know, series 1, with her and after Henry has had his way with Joanna or whatever, and he looks at her and says, and yeah, you didn't sleep with my brother either, basically.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think that I think it's real. I think that that's as real as it could be.
In my head, I picture this, and I kind of wrote this scene in the book, but I do picture this kind of on their wedding night, this kind of quick, nervous fumble, let's say. You know, no matter how small it was, I just can't believe nothing happened. I'm sorry, I can't. And fair play to her. I'm not saying I disagree with her lie at all.
What they did is what they did.
Yeah, you know, I don't blame her. I think if it was a lie, I think she lied to make her life a hell of a lot better. Fair enough. I'm not going to argue against that.
There's no way that Henry didn't know. Okay, like, I just don't believe that. But I think the bigger injustice here, to be fair, is to Arthur. Because basically what we're saying is he was a eunuch.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we don't think about Arthur. Well, I'm sorry, how often is Arthur discussed?
Right.
Bar when he's out with Catherine of Aragon. How often does anyone really sit down and talk about Arthur? He's been completely outcast in history. You know, he's discussed in the sense of his sexual activity,
right.
And not much. And it's so unfair for someone who was born to be king and died at such a young age. It's really not fair. And how much respect almost did Catherine have for Arthur to begin that lie? It was almost, it's kind of that fight or flight thing. And Catherine chose to fight, absolutely. You know?
And you know what's fun about this is that this is going to be one of those things that forever, ever, ever is going to be debated. Okay.
Yeah.
You know, did she or didn't she? I would have to ask myself what was wrong with her if she didn't.
Yeah. This main argument, it was the thing that was done. It was just as black and white as that. You got married and then you consummated the marriage. That was part of the religious ceremony, and it was just what happened. And unless, honestly, there was something seriously wrong with either of them, which we know it wasn't with Catherine, but unless, you know, Arthur had a serious dysfunction or something like that, I can honestly, and bearing in mind he was a young man, so not as likely, I cannot see any reason that they wouldn't have done it. And I mean, yeah, okay, she wasn't pregnant. She didn't get pregnant from it, if it did happen. But look at the pregnancies she did have.
Right.
She already had an issue with pregnancy anyway. So if her and Arthur even just happened to do it once, she would not necessarily conceive from that. And I mean, I think it was once. I think they probably slept together once on their wedding night, and that was it. And that,
you know, and I don't even know. And here's the thing: he was 14 or 15. So I mean,
yeah.
I'm thinking, you know,
he was a young man, you know. He would have seen an attractive woman. Yeah. I mean, I must
can't
about Arthur in that way, especially after watching The Spanish Princess. I'm sure the guy him in real life is absolutely lovely lovely looking. But in the Spanish Princess, oh my god, that hair.
Oh, God.
The funny thing was, I mean, Henry was so, I mean, they've got the ages all wrong. Anyway, but Henry was so young when Catherine came over. But they've got him running around with this young, attractive man. You know, he's gorgeous, the guy who plays Henry.
And Arthur has always been made to look like a pudding head.
Yeah.
I mean, and you're like,
Or
this kid did not deserve this, okay? He didn't.
bad rap, you know, and it's unbelievable that he, and I mean, that show, that's another discussion on the show. Don't get me, I enjoyed it. I did. But we've said it before, we'll say it again. Elizabeth of York, wow. Wow. You know?
It threw things at the and I remember you and I were messaging back and forth, and I was like, I can't.
Yeah.
I can't. I mean, it was Elizabeth of York. Oh, she deserves so much credit, so much respect, and to have her portray the kissing of Catherine.
And I must admit, my biggest pet peeve with that is when the whole scene where Elizabeth of York's dying, that whole thing, and she begs Henry to marry Catherine. I get that they were continuing on with this, you know, curse and all of that, but it was just so hard to watch. It wasn't needed. It just made me see Elizabeth of York as a pathetic woman, and she wasn't. But that show portrayed her as this kind of very pathetic, manipulative, awful woman. And then you've got Jodie Comer, who portrays her as this powerful, strong, amazing woman. You can't get, and both by the same company.
For fuck's sake, they made Margaret Beaufort look more rational than Elizabeth of York. Yeah, you know that's bad.
Yeah, the woman, I must admit, the woman who played Margaret Beaufort in the Spanish Princess, she is the woman who plays Catelyn Stark.
Yep.
And she was wonderful. I wish
so too.
I didn't like. You know, I absolutely think that was just completely they took liberties with that. However,
I love that. That was the only thing I liked.
Yeah. She was absolutely formidable. I think casting wise, Margaret Beaufort and the kid who played Henry, because honestly, if I was around in that time and that guy was king, I'd be happy. You know, yeah. So yeah, but that's
you know, the guy that played Henry to Jodie Comer. Whoa.
Yeah. So I remember seeing him.
Jacob something.
I always forget him, but I think that was one of the first things he's really in. I mean, he did I'm actually considering sitting down with that again, because it's just, you can historical inaccuracies if they're justified, and if, you know, there's a lot of markers they need to hit. What I don't like is when they do it just for the sake of entertainment and it's a bit silly.
I love the scene, and we know it's totally made up because it's totally made up in my book too. Was when he confronts her and tells her, "Oh, get out of here, get out." I was like, yes.
It's strange with the casting, see, because the White Queen, Rebecca Ferguson, you pick a bet. I mean,
girl crush.
Elizabeth Woodville, you know, she was just unbelievable. I mean, I adore her. She was perfect. His name's gone from my head. Max Irons.
Max Irons. I watched an interview with him and Rebecca Ferguson yesterday.
And the chemistry between them was like, and whenever I think of Edward IV, I think of Max Irons. You know?
Me too. But Max Irons was talking about, you know, they asked him how he got into the role. Was it, you know, the costumes, or was it this or that? And Max said, yeah, a little bit, you know, but mostly he said he was somewhere with a friend, and the friend was meeting Prince William.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah. Shoot, I want to be wherever that is, okay? But he said, even to me at my age and him at his age,
Yeah.
Said there was something that made him larger than life. There was this king thing.
Majesty, isn't there?
Yeah.
It's like, yeah.
And he said that's what he said. So, and it was, he said, and because I played a king, it was interesting to see how people related to me, because they started to relate to me as if I were a king. And he said, and that was pretty cool. And I'm like, you are just too cool, Max Irons.
Yeah. And that, yeah. And that and it really does. And I think that was one of the first things I'd ever seen him in, and I was like blown absolutely. That whole casting, I mean, if we're going to talk about it, that whole casting was unbelievable. I mean, George, George Duke of Clarence, wow. I mean, he has become...
And Richard III.
Oh, yeah.
Is Anurin Bernard or...
Anurin Bernard.
Yeah.
I always keep it, and I can't quite pronounce it. But he's... Why he hasn't been in more, I don't know, because he was the epitome of Richard III, and that whole casting. And then we kind of trickle down and we go to the White Princess. And with the White Princess, the casting was brilliant on Jodie and Jacob. I did not like the casting on Woodville in the White.
Elizabeth Ferguson damned it for all time. Okay, yeah. I just, but the thing that was so awful about the Elizabeth of York portrayals in both of them, no, the Elizabeth Woodville ones, was the fact that nothing was right about it.
Yeah.
It's like they took the Elizabeths and they did something, except for what Jodie did.
Yeah.
Otherwise everything else. And I'll tell you what, when I first saw White Princess and they had the rape scene, I thought, I don't know if she would have done this, yeah. And that was probably the only place that a little bit with Jodie's, portrayal of her. But then she got all ballsy and stuff. I was like, that's my girl.
Yeah.
That's my girl.
Strange, and I said, do you know what are you saying about the rape scene? I was thinking about this the other day. I watched The Other Boleyn Girl, and before I wrote The Most Happy, The Other Boleyn Girl was one of my favourite films. Since writing it, and I've done the copious amounts of research, I enjoy it, but it's not. You see the holes a lot clearer. But the scene in that, with Natalie and Eric Bana, and it's just, and I think, as awful as it sounds, we look at those scenes in historical things with such a different light, because we see these kind of rape scenes happen, and then kind of down the line they're a happy couple, and we're happy that they're a happy couple. But that happened by today's standards, by any standards, it's vile. So
I know.
It's a subject, but that did cross my mind.
And before we hang up, I'm gonna say this: the best portrayal of any historical love story is Rain.
Oh my God!
I know.
People,
I'm sorry.
Say on about Rain. Say whatever you want about Rain. It's historically inaccurate. It's teeny. It's missed the point on this, that, and the other. Francis and Mary's love story in Rain. Fall in love with Francis and Mary even more, even to the point when I'm, my book's totally different. It's accurate. Obviously, we've got some. It's two different stories to an extent. But when I'm picturing Francis and Mary, you see those two because the chemistry, the love, everything is just beautiful. No, if you take nothing else from that show, you take Toby Regbo and Adelaide Kane, and could you pick two better looking people either? And the interesting thing about Adelaide actually is she's descended from Mary. So people can say, all they want about, but there's no better woman to play her, really.
I put off watching Rain for a long time because I had gone along with the it's not right school of thought. I don't know why. And when I watched it, I cried. I mean, I cried.
Yeah.
Okay, because it was such they did everything they did with it, the locations, the people around them, everything was perfect for this love story. Now, as she went on, and things changed, not so much. I mean, once Frances died, for me, I was kind of done.
It better a lot,
Yeah.
But the series, that story, their love story, you don't care about the rest. And when they kind of break off for a bit, you're watching it and you're gunning for them to come back together, because it's just done in such a way, it flows so nicely, and they're just, and I mean, I'm not, people ship these people, and if Toby Regbo and Adelaide want to get together in real life, they'd be beautiful together, because it was just stunning, and it made me really fall in love with Mary even more. And I think, with Mary Queen of Scots, the film, for instance, or other films about Mary, Frances gets skipped over. Frances is forgotten about. That was just a thing that happened in her life, and we go from kind of Darnley onwards. Why?
But Rain was the most persuasive thing that I have ever seen that would make me really like Mary Stuart.
Yeah.
Okay, because Mary Stuart gets a bad rap. We know that. That's why you're writing this book, okay? We know that. But when you watch the tenderness in Rain, and then you hold it up to the Darnley thing in Mary Queen of Scots, in the, that whole thing, you just go, oh my God, this is not even fair to this girl. Yeah. I mean, so there's a lot, that's why I'm looking forward to your book, because you do give weight to Frances. It's kind of like Arthur. These are kind of like the lost guys, they're just, they're there. We know their names, but they die and they're forgotten, or they're used as, some kind of propaganda by somebody. So it's really, really sad. But
I think the interesting thing about Rain is my younger sister, when she lived with me, no interest in history, no interest in any of those things. And I think it was one night, Rain kind of came up on Netflix, and I said to her, oh, I've been meaning to watch it. I don't know much about it, been meaning to watch it. We put it on and we laughed our way through the first episode. I'm sat in my chair going, that's not right, what are they doing, that's stupid. And then before you know it, you've watched the whole series and you're going, oh, I like this. And my sister Courtney sat down and she watched the whole thing with me. And I tell you, our favourite thing about that is Adelaide's absolutely resounding, queenship. It's the way when she's talking to people, and I think there's a part where she's arguing with one of her friends, and she kind of switches from, yes, I'm your friend, and then she's, I am queen. And it's just that power, that absolute flood of power that comes out of her. And it's very hard to capture that. And it's almost like what you were saying with Max Iron. It's that being larger than life. And again, the show's inaccurate and it's got a lot of holes and all this. But if you take it back to how that woman played Mary Queen of Scots, you can't.
The people that bitch about historical accuracy.
Yeah.
Now, with that having said, okay, I don't like what Philippa Gregory did with Elizabeth of York.
Yeah.
I didn't like the end of the White Queen with the Richard III thing and on, okay?
Yeah.
But what did that do? That inspired me to look at Elizabeth Woodville. That inspired me to look at Elizabeth of York. It may not have been as accurate as, a history book, for sure, but it did get me thinking. And that's really, this is a great place to wind this up too, because that's what we do with our books. We're not saying, here, take this as gospel. This is what we're saying, what if this had happened? Or is it possible that this could have happened?
Look at this different lens kind of thing.
And, Holly, how much of Catherine of Aragon is in Mary Stuart.
Wow, exactly.
I mean,
You know,
if you think about it, it's all these hostile things,
yeah,
and they both died to be queen.
yeah.
So
You know, there is and we're talking about these strong women, and there is this massive connection between each of them. Although, you know, we've got Catherine of Aragon and Anne Boleyn who are pitted against each other because of these things. When you look at them both, the amount they have in common is actually unbelievable because of the way they were. They were just these like undeniably strong. They were both stubborn. You know, if we look at it that way, they were both stubborn. They both wanted what they wanted. They were both determined that they wanted to be queen. You know, I mean that's debatable with Anne, but they both had these qualities, and it's the same when you go through almost all the wives that they had this strength.
they each had, and they were, and none of the Tudor women, all of them, okay, are just beyond definition. You can't put any one of them in a pigeonhole.
No.
Okay, not even Catherine Howard, who might be closest to that, but you can't pigeonhole any of them because they each were so strong and they each faced adversity none of us will ever know, ever.
And the one that really highlights that for me, and I'm very looking forward to getting to her, but the one that really highlights that for me is Catherine Parr, because you can't pigeonhole Catherine Parr because she goes from one woman to another in a matter of years. In my head, she's two women. She's the woman who absolutely fought for women's rights and for women's education and all those sorts of things. And then on the other side, she's a woman that possibly aided in the terrible things that happened to Elizabeth. To me, that's two different women.
I know, they're just, each one of them is a paradox.
Yeah.
Each one. Catherine Howard, only by virtue of the fact that she was so much younger, is a little bit more transparent. Anne of Cleves, come on, I mean, somebody played their cards right. I mean, each one of them has these amazing strengths. What do you want to do next time? Anne's next in mine.
True.
Huh?
Let's do. I'm happy. It's been a while since we've done Anne.
Okay.
I'm happy to go back over. I feel with Anne, there's always more to learn, and I've even since writing the book, I'm learning and learning and learning, and there's more and more. So.
I get that.
I'm happy to kind of see what parallels there are from the discussion we had when we spoke about her previously to the discussion we'll have this time.
Henry. Sorry.
Henry will be there too.
All right, honey. Well, let's wrap this up, and we'll do Miss Anne Boleyn next time. Okay?
You too.
Thank you.
You have been listening to the History Brats podcast, sponsored by Churchill Publishing, where your creativity is our priority. Catch us on Facebook and YouTube, as well as at churchill-publishing.com. See you next time.